Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast designed to help you become the leader you are destined to be. Today's episode is one of my favorites to talk about. I really, really, really love the concept and the idea that our emotions can either serve us or enslave us. And I come back to this concept again and again through podcasts and blogs and posts because it is so powerful. Even when you know and understand these principles, we still, none of us get it right all the time. I know because, we try as much as, even if we know these principles are true, knowing them and applying them are sometimes far apart, right? But that's not just true with leadership principles and personal growth principles. The lack of knowledge is not what holds us back in life. It's the application, right? Every single one of us know things that we should do that we haven't done. We know things that we shouldn't do that we do anyway, right? It's not that we don't know. Most of us know things that we should do or shouldn't do, right? It's the behavior or the application of what we know that helps us move forward or not. For example, I use this analogy a lot, but everyone knows we should drink about 8 glasses of water every day, right? And exercise several times a week. But I know I don't drink 8 glasses of water every single day. There are days when I know I should drink more water and I still don't, right? For whatever reason. Maybe I just get busy, maybe we're traveling and so it's just not convenient and or maybe I just get busy and wrapped up and then I forget and this it's not the lack of knowledge, right? Every single one of us struggle with that at some level. And so the reason I come back to this concept relative to emotions is because I don't think you can hear it too much, right? I know that even if we understand the concept of being proactive and how our emotions can serve us or enslave us, I, I don't think you can be reminded of this concept too much because I know we still all struggle with it at some level. And so, it's a common element in the human experience. But let me put it that way. So, I wanted to share this podcast with you because I was thinking about this topic not too well. It's been just a couple weeks ago by the time you get this podcast, but um, relative to emotions serving us or enslaving us. And I was thinking about it in a new perspective. And that's why I wanted to drill down and touch on this topic again, because as I thought about this in a new concept or a new light, I guess, just a different angle on the same topic, I wanted to pass this on to you, to all of you, because there again, I strive to be a river, right? When I learn something that's powerful for me, that gives me an aha moment, then I want to share that with someone. If I've thought about something in a new way or I've understood something in a different way, then I want to share that and pass that on, right? I don't want to hold on to information that I know can help someone else move forward. It helped me move forward. Mac and I just got back from speaking near Washington, D.C. We spent 3 days with a group up there. It's a large county government group up there. I think they have maybe 15,000 employees or team members in the county works department. But we weren't speaking to all of them. We were speaking to just one specific department and division, but we did a 3-day workshop with them. So we had obviously 3 days. We had a lot of time to speak and to teach and to get to know them a little bit as well. And we were wrapping up after 3 days. It was a great experience, very engaged group. They did it was interesting. They did a presentation. We kind of did a little graduation ceremony at the end of the 3 days and presented them with certificates and that sort of thing. And we had the opportunity to just record some of the comments that they had, and the feedback was phenomenal. So they were a really, really great group, really got a lot out of the workshop. But toward the end of the 3 days, we got to winding down. We were wrapping up and getting ready to do the graduation ceremony. And as always, Mac and I talk about these personal growth and leadership principles and principles on being successful. And I shared with them, just like I share with you, right? I don't get just excited and fired up about these principles because I read them in a book and they sounded good. I get excited about them and passionate about them because I've applied them to my life and they work, right? And I know if they work for me, they can work for you. And so that's why when I learn something or I think of something in a new way or I raise my level of awareness, I want to pass that on because if it has helped me in some way, then I know it can help somebody else. But you might not know it. You might not read the same books I'm reading or listening to the same podcasts I'm listening to. And so that's why I always want to make sure that as I'm learning and growing, I'm sharing what I'm learning and growing with you. That's why I do a podcast at the end of every year. It's one of my favorite podcasts to do where I share some of the best quote unquote books that I read over the course of the year because I read a lot. I read one of my goals, you've heard me say it before, probably one of my goals is 50 nonfiction books per year. So that averages out to one a week, but it usually doesn't look like that. It usually looks like 3 this week and none next week, depending on our travel and speaking schedule. But um, it's one of my favorite episodes to do. And I always have to say, best is relative, right? Best doesn't mean it was the best book necessarily. It just means that there was a nugget of wisdom or something, insight that I got that really spoke to me in a specific way. And so I highlighted that and say, I want to talk about this on the podcast because I couldn't drill down to all what I got out of all 50 books that I read over the course of the year. That would be a super, super long podcast. And speaking of long podcasts, you guys, it's crazy to think of, but in just 2 weeks, we will be starting season number 4 of this podcast. It is incredible just to think that it's come so far and it's been been so long already. It seems like it's just happened in the blink of an eye, and yet crazy to think of that. And as I go back and listen to some of the earliest episodes, I thought, wow, I know I've grown a lot since then. So anyway, that was a little bit of a rabbit trail off topic for today. So today's topic, all about emotions. They serve us or they enslave us. So relative to the concept of emotions, you've heard me say it. Um, Quoting Andy Stanley. Andy Stanley says, our feelings are terrible leaders, right? The thing is that we are human and we have emotions. That is just a fact of life. We are human, we have emotions. Things happen that we like or don't like, and we get emotions based on that, right? Our circumstances influence us, they cause the emotions in us, it causes an emotional response. That's why it's more challenging to be proactive at home than it is maybe at work, right? I bet that most of us can relate to, maybe you just haven't had a great day, but you're holding it together at work and you go home and the slightest little thing and you blow up, right? And it was like you did so good at holding those emotions in check all day at work, right? You put on a smile, you're like, I'm fine, I can get through this, life is okay. And then you go home and just the slightest little thing is like the straw that breaks the camel's back, and poof, you blow up at something, you lose your temper, you snap at someone. It happens, right? I bet I'm not the only one who's experienced that. And the reason is because, particularly with our personal life, the relationships at home, right, we have more emotion there. And so it's more difficult to be proactive and say those emotions are there, but they don't have to dictate how I respond to the situation, right? We nail that down a little bit better at work usually than we do at home. Because at home, those personal close relationships, we have more emotion in them, right? So it's more difficult to recognize those emotions as they bubble up in the moment, and more difficult to say pause. And like Covey says, between stimulus and response, human beings have the freedom to choose a response, right? We choose our responses better a greater percentage of the time at work than we do at home. Now, when we come back to that, that concept. It's normal to have the emotions, right? I've said that before. Humans are emotional creatures. God gave us the emotions. There's nothing wrong with that. But they don't always serve us in terms of responding to them, right? Because we don't always make the best choices or decisions or take the best actions or say the best things when we are emotionally wired. We just don't, right? When we are more proactive and we can say, let those emotions are there, but let me push them to the side and consider this intellectually, logically, then choose my response. What's the best response here? What's the response that's going to help me increase my influence? What's going to help me lead myself better? Let me choose that response. So the funny thing is that most of us would call ourselves logical thinking creatures. I guarantee you, most of us would like to think we are rational human beings. But it's interesting how many of our decisions, choices, and habits are built on emotions. Think about that. How many of the decisions that you make are based on emotions rather than intellectual thinking, proactive decision making? I guarantee you it's more than you think. And that kind of gets a little uncomfortable when we start to think about it and we're like, ooh, a lot of the decisions that I make are more emotional than they are rational. If we were to have a scale, how many more decisions do I make that are emotional versus logical, rational, proactive thoughts, intentional choices? Um, and by that, it doesn't have to be something big, it could be some of the little things. Some of the little habits that maybe we started creating and building because of an emotional response. And now we don't even think about it. It's just a habit that we do that we started because of an emotional response, and we just have continued on autopilot, right? So, and that could play out in so many different ways. But my point here is that those emotions are normal. It's just recognizing they don't serve us. But here's the thing, emotions are warning signs because those emotions are going to show where you have fear or self doubt or something, right? Those emotions are kind of a warning flag to say, notice this. When you get emotion, when you feel a strong, particularly negative emotion, that's really what I'm talking about in this context. Anytime you feel strong negative emotions like fear, anger, shame, guilt, anything like that, that should be a cue to look inside and ask yourself why. Get curious about that because we all have emotions. There are going to be times when we have emotions that bubble up to the surface. What I'm saying here is that what will help you be proactive is if when those emotions happen, I want you to be very curious, not judgmental. Don't be judgmental towards yourself, but I want you to be curious about why that emotion is there to begin with. I'll give you an example from my personal experience. And I've probably mentioned this before. I'm not very comfortable with confrontations. That is not something that comes naturally to me. So anytime there is any sign of a confrontation of any kind, my initial normal reaction is to just kind of withdraw into my turtle shell. It's just a fact, right? My natural instinct when there is a confrontation, when anybody gets loud voice or aggressive body language, and it might not even be that they mean it that way. It could just be that they're excited about something and they just get louder and louder and louder, and they just get more, emotion and bigger body language and expressive, and or maybe they are mad, maybe they're angry, or they care a lot about what they're talking about. But whatever it is, anytime that any type of perceived confrontational interaction starts to happen, I just naturally want to withdraw. I just want to crawl into my turtle shell and let that turtle shell be the armor. And that's just an emotional response. Now, the key is being aware of that in myself when I catch that happening. Now, being a little more self aware, I just get curious about why I'm having that response. Why is that emotion being triggered to begin with, right? Because when I feel that strong negative emotion, that's a cue to look inside and ask yourself, why? Why is this emotion? Because a lot of times what's happening is we are being triggered by something that's not really the response we want in the situation, but that emotional response and trigger is something that happened 20 years ago. And yet we're still responding to that emotion, right? That emotion was created in response to a situation 20 years ago, and yet we are still acting it out at some level today. Now, I don't know if that applies to every single one of us, but what I do know is every single one of us have moments where we get it right, where we're able to push that emotion to the side and just say, no, let me proactively choose my response. And we also have days when we don't get it right, when we just feel that emotion bubbling up and we just let it overflow, right? So I know that every single one of us struggle with being proactive. There's nothing wrong with that. The degree to which we are able to be effective at being proactive and recognizing those emotions when they come up, choosing to be self aware and intentional in our responses, the easier our life will be at home, at work, in relationships, professionally, in your career. I guarantee you, the more proactive that you can be, the easier it's going to be for you to navigate through life because life is going to throw a curveball at you. It's just guaranteed. And you might get a curveball every single day, right? And normal human response wants to melt down or get angry or yell or fuss or complain or rupture the relationship in some way. And then later you go, man, that wasn't the best response in this situation. So I guarantee you, the more proactive you can be, the easier your life will be because that increases your influence, options, and opportunities, right? Being proactive is always going to move you forward in life. So when you feel those emotions coming up, right, they can serve you or they can enslave you, but how they serve you is you become aware of them first and then you get curious, why am I having this emotional response? And that was kind of the aha moment for me recently was realizing that when any type of semi perceived anything close to a confrontation or anything like that, I naturally want to go ooh into my turtle shell. I wanted to, that aha moment for me was just say, why? What is causing that emotional trigger in my response? Because a lot of times it causes us to overreact to the present situation based on our experience, history, or what's happened to us in the past, right? And that's where our emotions enslave us. Because a lot of times the emotion of the moment shouldn't be that strong, but we're responding based on something that happened in the past. And then we tend to overreact because what happened in the past was much greater, worse, or more impactful than what's going on right now. But we're still allowing those emotions from years ago sometimes to impact us in the present moment. And that's where we can get into a lot of conflict, right? That's where we get into a lot of trouble when it's much easier to let those emotions run over us and we get reactive. And then it's kind of just a spiral that we stay reactive. So, when you're thinking about that, get curious because when you become aware of that emotional response, you can choose to control it, right? But be very careful that you don't allow it to control you. And that could play out by like I talked about, overreacting to the current situation. But another example of how it can control you is you run so far in the other direction that you're letting it control you by responding in complete opposite. So what I mean by that is, for example, if I were to respond to any kind of conflict or confrontational situation by instead of withdrawing, I say, oh, I'm not going to let it control me. I'm just going to get aggressive and louder myself. And I'm just going to, attack that other person or the situation. I'm still allowing the emotions created from the past to control me, right? I'm still overreacting in the situation based on an experience in the past because I'm overreacting to what the present situation calls for, and I'm reacting, right? I'm not responding proactively. I'm just allowing those emotions to dictate my behavior. I'm just responding in the opposite direction and how that plays out. So be careful about that, right? Because we can overcorrect, but we can overcorrect too much. And what we want to do is find that healthy balance where we say, there's an emotional response to this situation. I wonder why. A, is it something in the present moment, or B, maybe it was something that's emotion created from the past. I need to look at that. But then don't let it determine my response in the present moment. Now, I know all of that sounds really, really good as you're sitting here listening to that podcast. It sounds really good as I'm sitting here saying it. But what's powerful is being able to apply that in the moment. Now, don't beat yourself up if you don't get this right all the time or you don't get it right next time. What I want you to do is just think about one situation or example or situation over the next week of your life where you might get emotional, or you see that you've gotten emotional in the past in that situation. So I want you to proactively think forward and go, when I see that trigger coming or when I feel that emotional response popping up, number one, I'm going to be curious. Why do I feel that way? What's causing me to feel that way? And B, what response would serve me better, right? How can I pause? And you might not be able to give the best response, but you're not looking for perfection here, just progress, right? You're looking to just get a little bit better. Maybe in that situation, you recognize, maybe you tend to go maybe you tend to overreact in a situation. So you're like, rather than overreact, the best thing for me is to walk away for a few minutes, right? That might be the best situation for you in the moment. So work toward that. Whatever it is that you decide would serve you better. What's a more proactive response to the emotion of this situation? Because your emotions will trigger automatic responses if you are not self-aware, right? So all I'm really helping you think through is where you need to be a little more self-aware so that when life throws you the curveball, you can go, I know that I tend to respond to situations like this in this way. Let me pause and choose a more proactive response. And the more you can do that, the easier it will become every single time. Promise. It gets like anything. Practice makes improvement. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.